Have you ever felt an unexplainable pull toward someone, as though your souls met long before your bodies did? It's not the kind of connection you can explain away with chemistry or timing. It's something deeper, quiet but certain, like a memory you can't quite place but feels more real than the present. Across cultures and centuries, people have tried to make sense of this mystery. Philosophers, mystics, and modern psychologists alike have all wrestled with this strange sense of destined union, what we now often call soulmates, twin flames, or spiritual partners. Carl Jung, whose work bridges psychology, myth, and spirituality, had a name for these inner forces that shape our outer lives. He spoke of the anima and animus, inner feminine and masculine energies within each of us, and how they act as guides toward wholeness through relationships. These aren't just psychological theories, they point to something deeply sacred. Jung believed that relationships, especially the ones that feel fated, are mirrors for our own individuation, the lifelong process of becoming our true self. But here's the thing, this isn't just about romance. When people speak of soul connections or destined love, they're often sensing something spiritual beneath the emotional pull. Fields like mysticism, comparative religion, and even quantum physics suggest that we're all entangled in ways that transcend logic. Whether you call it divine timing, spiritual contracts, or just energy alignment, there's a growing awareness that some bonds carry a force beyond personal choice. In fact, there's a passage in the Quran, Surah Kahf, verse 16, where God says, "We are closer to them than their jugular vein." It's a powerful reminder that the sacred is not distant. It's as close as our breath, as intimate as our longing. And it makes you wonder, when you feel that rare, undeniable recognition in someone else's presence, could it be that you're not just seeing them, but seeing through them into a part of yourself you've forgotten? This script is going to take you through a journey, not a fantasy, but a real grounded exploration of how destined love works. We'll look at Jung's ideas about soul recognition, why projections in relationships matter, how separation often shapes deeper love, and what ancient spiritual wisdom says about reunion, transformation, and the eternal bond between two souls. And along the way, we'll ask some important questions, ones that don't just challenge how we think about love, but how we live it. So if you've ever wondered why certain people enter your life like echoes of something timeless, stay with me. This story is yours too. Revealing the hidden blueprint. Archetypes and destiny. Some relationships feel like they were written into your story before you ever took your first breath. They stir something ancient in you. You can't rationalize it, but you can't deny it either. Carl Jung believed this wasn't just coincidence, it was archetypal. According to him, the collective unconscious is a vast storehouse of symbols and patterns that live beneath our awareness, shaping our lives in ways we're often blind to. Within this realm are archetypes like the eternal beloved, the seeker, the child, the shadow. Blueprints not just for personality, but for how we love and recognize love. Jung's idea of the collective unconscious gives us a powerful clue into how we might recognize a destined love, a soul connection that seems to rise from somewhere beyond reason. These aren't just random feelings, they're signs of ancient patterns playing out in modern relationships. From the philosophy of ancient Greece to the teachings of Buddhism, this idea of repeating patterns, cosmic alignments in the way humans bond, has been echoed across time. The Greeks called it sympathia, an interconnectedness of all things. In Buddhist psychology, relationships are seen as karmic fields, where encounters are not accidental, but arise out of causes woven across lifetimes. But here's where it gets interesting. If love is part of a larger pattern, does that mean we're destined to repeat certain relationships until we understand their meaning? In Zoroastrianism, a lesser-known but profound source of spiritual insight, the Gathas of Zarathustra teaches that true connection is not emotional indulgence, but moral alignment, The triad of good thoughts, good words, good deeds becomes the structure upon which lasting union is built. So even if a soul bond feels destined, it still demands ethical clarity. It still asks us to grow. This is where sociology and ethics converge. Genuine love isn't just personal, it's also social. It affects how we show up in our communities, our families, even in how we treat strangers. When we meet someone who activates that rare recognition within us, they awaken not only our desire, but our potential to evolve. That's why Carl Jung's teachings remain so relevant. He didn't see love as a mere emotion, but as a psychic event that has the power to transform. He corrected many misconceptions in the way people understood love and soul connections. And yes, it's Carl Jung, not K. Lung, as some mistranscripts humorously misstate. But his message remains clear. There's something bigger than our egos at play in the people we're drawn to. And the question now becomes, what is that invisible thread pulling us towards certain people again and again? And are we paying attention to what it's trying to teach us? The projection dance. What you see is what you hide. Sometimes what feels like destined love isn't love at all. It's a mirror. You meet someone and instantly you feel something shift. They seem to reflect something you've been searching for, something you thought you lost or maybe never even knew you needed. But here's the twist. What you're seeing in them might actually be a piece of yourself that's been buried, waiting for recognition. In spiritual psychology and philosophy of mind, this is what's known as projection. Jung emphasized this phenomenon throughout his work, especially in the context of anima and animus, the inner archetypes of the feminine and masculine energies within each of us. When we meet someone who seems to complete us, we may actually be projecting our inner anima or animus onto them. It's not necessarily their personality we're falling for. It's our unconscious image of what we've disowned or forgotten within ourselves. This is why twin flame or soul connection experiences can be so intense. They press all the right buttons, not because the other person is perfect, but because they reflect our hidden aspirations, fears, or unresolved wounds. The spiritual union feels magnetic because the psyche is trying to heal itself through this connection. And healing doesn't happen without facing truth. A powerful reflection of this inner process can be found in the Cloud of Unknowing, a lesser-known yet profound Christian mystical work. It teaches that to encounter divine love, or even true human love, we must surrender our mental constructs and confront the unknown within. That cloud isn't out there. It's the fog of our own projections. We don't see people clearly until we begin to clear that fog, until we're willing to ask, what am I seeing in them that really belongs to me? Thomas Aquinas once said that love is an act of the will directed toward the good of the other, rooted in truth. He argued that love without truth isn't love, it's illusion, and Jung would agree. For him, a destined soul connection wasn't supposed to sweep us off our feet in fantasy. It was meant to ground us in reality. Real love, especially the kind that feels archetypal, will always bring up what's unresolved. That's the gift and the challenge. This is why so many of us feel both euphoric and terrified when we meet someone who stirs us at a soul level. It's not just attraction, it's exposure. The relationship becomes a psychological crucible, not just a romance. And here's the kicker. If we're brave enough to stay conscious through it, we get something far more valuable than temporary bliss. We get transformation. So when someone enters your life and stirs you deeply, ask not just, who are they to me? But what are they showing me about myself? Because that answer might be the key to the love you've been seeking all along. Facing the shadow, love as a mirror. There's a moment in every soul connection when the initial magic gives way to something more raw, more unsettling. You begin to see the parts of yourself that you've worked so hard to keep hidden. Old fears, forgotten wounds, unhealed traumas. And somehow, the very person who felt like your perfect mirror suddenly starts reflecting everything you'd rather not see. This isn't a breakdown of the connection. According to Jungian psychology, it's exactly what the connection was designed to do. Carl Jung believed that true relationships, especially those rooted in the collective unconscious, activate what he called the shadow, the unconscious part of our psyche that holds all the traits we deny or reject about ourselves. And when two people are soul connected, their interaction becomes a spiritual mirror. What we admire in the other often reflects our inner potential. What irritates us often points directly to what we haven't yet accepted or healed within. This mirror effect isn't just poetic, it's psychologically and spiritually profound. In the esoteric branches of Christianity, particularly within mystical interpretations, love isn't framed as comfort, it's framed as purification. The closer two souls grow, the more heat they generate. This heat brings the hidden to the surface, just like fire draws out impurities from gold. You're not just seeing the other person, you're being shown to yourself. A lesser-known Taoist text, The Secret of the Golden Flower, describes this process with stunning clarity. It speaks of how spiritual energy, when activated by inner or outer union, starts to churn old energies, what we'd call emotional patterns or karmic imprints. These patterns don't disappear quietly. They rise like sediment in stirred water. But if you don't panic, if you observe and stay still, the water settles again, this time clearer than before. Laozi, the sage behind the Tao Te Ching, offered a truth that feels particularly relevant here. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. In the context of a spiritual union, this means the person you believe you're getting to know might just be the key to knowing yourself. Not in theory, but in visceral, sometimes uncomfortable, always honest ways. What starts as an emotional high in these destined connections often transforms into shadow work. It's the kind of healing that's not always pretty but is undeniably real. And it's this very process of exposure, confrontation, and integration that makes the connection not just romantic, but sacred. Because when love can hold both light and darkness, it stops being a feeling and becomes a force. One that changes not just your heart, but your soul. The alchemy of crisis, when the union shatters illusions. What happens when everything falls apart? Not just in the world outside, but within a connection that once felt divinely orchestrated. What if the very person who seemed to awaken your soul suddenly disappears, triggers chaos, or even hurts you? It's tempting to think the connection was an illusion. But Carl Jung might say the illusion was never the bond. It was your expectations of what that bond should feel like. And when those expectations collapse, a deeper truth often emerges. In the ancient art of alchemy, the Negredo stage marks the first and darkest phase of transformation. It's the breakdown, the death of what once was. But it's not meaningless suffering. It's the necessary dissolution before something more refined can be born. Jung believed that our inner world follows this same pattern, especially when we encounter soul-level love. A destined relationship doesn't only reveal your light, it also dismantles everything within you that was built on fantasy, fear, or ego. The illusion shatters, not to punish you, but to prepare you. This idea is beautifully reflected in the Mandukya Upanishad, a lesser-known but profound text from the Indian spiritual tradition. It teaches that human consciousness moves through 4 states: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and the state beyond. Most people never access that 4th state, Turiya, because it requires the ego to dissolve. In love, when crisis strikes, we're often forced into that ego death. The dream of the perfect other collapses, and we're left with a haunting question: who am I without them? And more deeply, who am I beyond the illusions I projected onto them? Adi Shankaracharya, a great Indian philosopher and mystic, insisted on the importance of viveka, discernment. Not just intellectual analysis, but the spiritual clarity to distinguish the real from the unreal. When a soul connection hits a breaking point, it invites us into this very discernment. Can we separate our true love from our fantasies about love? Can we see the soul of the other without needing them to fulfill our stories of salvation? Jung would say that this is where individuation truly begins. Not when love is easy, but when love breaks you open and demands growth. The spiritual transformation catalyzed by crisis isn't just about healing. It's about remembering. Remembering that the union isn't meant to complete you. It's meant to wake you. And sometimes that awakening comes through loss, confusion, and even heartbreak. So if you find yourself in the ruins of a once sacred bond, don't rush to sweep the pieces away. Sit with them, study them. Ask what part of yourself was living in illusion and what part is now ready to emerge in truth. Because in the language of the soul, breaking apart is often the first step toward becoming whole. Integrating light and dark, the path of spiritual maturity. Let's talk about the kind of love that doesn't just uplift you, it stretches you. Not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that shows you who you are when your walls come down. By now we've seen how soul connections awaken our unconscious, stir projections, and often break us wide open. But what happens after the chaos? What's waiting on the other side of the illusion? Carl Jung believed that real love, the kind rooted in the collective unconscious, was never about bliss without contrast. It's about integration, the lifelong journey of bringing opposites into balance, the union of anima and animus, the light with the shadow, the part of us that longs with the part of us that fears. This process of integration is at the heart of individuation, the path toward becoming whole. And no other relationship demands this kind of wholeness like a spiritual union. It's easy to mistake intensity for destiny. But as the initial fire cools, true soul connections require something quieter and more sacred. Acceptance. Acceptance not just of the other person's beauty, but of their flaws. Not just of your compatibility, but of your differences. This is where spiritual maturity begins, when love asks you not just to feel, but to grow. A powerful voice from ancient Gnosticism, Thunder, Perfect Mind, offers a striking metaphor for this kind of union. This lesser-known text presents the divine feminine as both shadow and light, chaos and order, sorrow and joy. I am the one who is honored and the one who is scorned, the text declares. In this paradox, we see the truth of spiritual relationships. The divine doesn't show up only in harmony. It often reveals itself through contradiction. This duality was also acknowledged by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who taught that mercy and compassion are among the greatest signs of divine presence in our lives. In the Quran, it says that he created spouses for us, so that we may find tranquility and placed between us affection and mercy. Quran 30:21. Real love isn't always peaceful, but it should always return to mercy. Not passive tolerance, but the active choice to see and love the other completely. So when your partner shows you not just who they are, but who they're not, can you still hold space for that? Can you accept the moments when they don't show up as the hero in your story, but instead reflect a truth you've avoided? That's the crucible of a conscious relationship. It's not about merging into one being or erasing differences. It's about standing fully in your light, fully in your shadow, and allowing the other to do the same. And from there, something sacred begins. Not a perfect romance, but a transformative spiritual union. One that helps you mature into the kind of person who doesn't just fall in love, but becomes love itself. The collective unconscious, eternal myths of Union. Why do stories of destined lovers, twin flames, or soulmates appear in every culture, every era, every mythology? Whether it's Sufi tales of yearning, Greek tragedies, or star-crossed modern romances, there's a haunting familiarity to the theme. Two souls pulled toward one another by something greater than choice, something almost cosmic. Carl Jung would argue that it's not just coincidence, it's the collective unconscious speaking. Jung saw the collective unconscious as a vast internal ocean, filled with archetypal patterns that every human inherits. These archetypes, like the hero, the mother, the shadow, shape our experiences long before we're aware of them. But among these, there is one that continues to stir humanity's imagination across generations, the archetype of eternal love. Not just romantic love, but the deeper, transformative bond that promises reunion, healing, and transcendence. This archetypal pattern explains why we resonate with myths where love defies time, space, and even death. Whether it's Orpheus descending into the underworld for Eurydice, or Layla and Majnun dissolving into madness and mysticism, these aren't just stories, they're echoes, reflections of something imprinted in our very soul structure. And when we encounter a real-life connection that mirrors those myths, it doesn't just feel intense, it feels inevitable. In Sufism, there's an understanding that human love is a reflection of divine longing. The soul seeks not only union with another, but with the source itself. It's why so many spiritual traditions emphasize love not as desire, but as a force of remembrance. A return to something lost, or more accurately, something forgotten. A striking Buddhist perspective comes from the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, a lesser-known but vital text. It teaches that true awakening comes when we realize the illusion of separation itself. In other words, the soulmate or twin flame isn't just someone you love, it's someone who, through their very presence, reminds you that we are never truly separate, that beneath the identities, fears, and stories, we are already one. Thich Nhat Hanh, with his beautiful teachings on mindfulness, often spoke of interbeing, the idea that we inter-are with everyone and everything. You cannot separate the flower from the sunlight or the beloved from the self. So when a spiritual partner walks into your life and changes your inner world, it's not just about chemistry, it's about remembering that your soul has always been part of a larger pattern, a symbolic love blueprint written into the very structure of human experience. This is why such connections feel so intense, even overwhelming. They're not just personal, they're archetypal. You're not just falling for a person, you're stepping into a myth, an ancient story that continues to unfold in you. And once you realize that, the question becomes not whether the story is real, but whether you're willing to live it with presence, humility, and courage. Recognizing the tug of something higher, synchronicities and faith. Have you ever noticed how some meetings feel orchestrated by something larger than coincidence? A random encounter that changes everything, a missed train that puts you in the right place, a conversation that echoes something you were just thinking. When it comes to soul connections and destined love, these moments, small yet profound, tend to multiply. Carl Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, a term that suggests that certain coincidences aren't random at all, but meaningful. Synchronicities are like whispers from the universe, gentle nudges pointing us towards something significant. In Jungian psychology, they're signs that the unconscious is aligning with the outer world. When you experience repeated symbols, numbers, names, or moments of impossible timing in a spiritual relationship, it's often the psyche's way of signaling. Pay attention. There's something sacred happening beneath the surface. Soulmates, twin flames, and karmic partners often meet under improbable circumstances, precisely because they're not meant to be ordinary. This idea of higher orchestration is deeply rooted in spiritual traditions. In Kabbalah, the Zohar, a foundational yet lesser-known mystical text, speaks of souls as sparks of divine light that have become scattered and are drawn together across time for tikkun, or cosmic repair. Each meeting, each reunion, is part of a divine web of healing. So when you feel an intense pull towards someone, it might not just be attraction. It might be your soul remembering a sacred contract. This idea also aligns with modern reflections on interconnectedness. Alan Watts, the philosopher and spiritual teacher, once described the universe as a single energy field that is pretending to be many. To him, moments of synchronicity or unexplainable alignment were reminders that we are not separate beings fumbling in the dark. We are participants in a greater unfolding. In a destined union, these signs can feel amplified, as if time and space are bending to bring two people together for something more than love, for transformation. But synchronicity alone isn't enough. It requires faith. Not blind belief, but a quiet trust in the deeper intelligence of life. The kind of faith that lets you hold paradoxes, connection and distance, recognition and confusion, desire and surrender. Because often, when we're presented with a destined relationship, the rational mind will try to explain it away, resist it, or control it. But the soul doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, rhythms, and inner knowing. And so, if you're experiencing meaningful coincidences in connection with another person, if the timing, the feeling, the inner knowing is too precise to ignore, maybe it's not a coincidence at all. Maybe it's the universe pulling strings behind the scenes, drawing you towards someone not because of fate in the romantic sense, but because your growth, your healing, your individuation requires it. Synchronicity is the universe's quiet way of reminding us. There's more going on here than meets the eye. The question is, are we still enough to hear it and brave enough to follow it? Separation as sacred space, letting the self mature. It's one of the hardest truths to accept. Sometimes even the most powerful soul connection requires distance, not because the bond is broken, but because the self is still forming. We tend to think of separation as failure, as an end. But in many spiritual traditions and philosophies, separation is a sacred phase. It's not the closing of a door, but the widening of the soul's path. Carl Jung often emphasized that the path of individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole, integrated self, can't be bypassed, not even in love. In fact, soul connections often catalyze this journey precisely through disruption. When someone touches the deepest part of you, it can awaken not just love, but also fear, dependency, or unfinished business from your past. And that's where separation can serve as a kind of spiritual alchemy. It forces you inward. In existentialism and phenomenology, thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir and Søren Kierkegaard pointed to solitude as a necessary dimension of human growth. Kierkegaard described love as the highest calling. But he also reminded us that love is not about clinging. It's about choosing freely, from a place of inner strength. And you can't choose freely when you're afraid to be alone. This deeper view of separation is echoed in Meditations on the Tarot, a lesser-known Christian hermetic text written anonymously, yet rich in insight. The author speaks of relational trials as archetypal initiations, stages in a symbolic journey through the inner worlds. When the outer connection fades or becomes strained, it becomes a sacred test. Can you sustain your connection to the divine, to your own center, without leaning on the other? Many mystics and teachers have said that the real spiritual union isn't tested in moments of closeness, but in moments of absence. Can you honor the soul connection even when it doesn't comfort you? Can you continue your emotional healing and spiritual transformation even when the other person feels 1,000 miles away, literally or emotionally? Eckhart Tolle, in his teachings on presence, reminds us that the now is always enough, but the mind often resists that simplicity. We want resolution, we want reunion, but sometimes what the soul actually needs is silence, stillness. The sacred space where healing takes root, not through words or closeness, but through distance, reflection, and quiet becoming. It might seem paradoxical, but many destined loves only fulfill their purpose when both individuals step back to face themselves fully. It's in that separation that we learn how much of our desire was love and how much was need. We begin to see where the other was carrying parts of us we hadn't yet claimed. So if you're in the middle of a separation right now, especially one that feels cosmic, unresolved, or painfully incomplete, maybe it's not the end of the story. Maybe it's a sacred pause, a space designed not to destroy the bond, but to prepare both of you to meet again, not as halves seeking completion, but as whole beings ready to co-create something more conscious, more enduring, more real. The return, reunion on a higher plane. When love returns after a long silence, it doesn't come back the same. Something has changed. The people, the timing, the energy. It all feels older, deeper, more grounded. In many world traditions, there's a sacred motif of return. It's not just about coming back to someone. It's about coming back transformed. And in soul connections, this return often feels like remembering a dream you once woke from, only now with clearer eyes and a steadier heart. Carl Jung never promised that transformation would be easy, but he did believe it was necessary. And in Jungian psychology, separation and return are part of a rhythm, the psyche's way of evolving through cycles of death and rebirth. When two souls are meant to reunite, they don't come back to finish where they left off. They return to begin something entirely new, not from a place of need or projection, but from a place of integration. This cycle is echoed in many spiritual paths. In mysticism and comparative religion, the return after adversity is often seen as purification. Like a phoenix, the love must burn before it can fly. In relationships, this means that the distance, the pain, the silence, it all serves to burn away ego, fantasy, and dependency, so that what's left can actually support the weight of real love. A spiritual union forged through this kind of process is no longer driven by craving, but by consciousness. A beautiful example of this can be found in the life of Milarepa, a lesser-known Tibetan Buddhist text. Milarepa, a deeply flawed but devoted spiritual seeker, spends years in solitude facing his inner darkness. His retreats are not escapes, they're necessary crucibles. And it's only after this radical inner work that he becomes ready to teach, to love, and to serve without ego. In a similar way, when soulmates or twin flames reunite after long separation, it's not a resumption, it's a resurrection. The Dalai Lama, known for his wisdom and emotional clarity, often speaks of compassion not as an emotion, but as a discipline. True compassion, he says, arises from inner balance. And in destined love, this means we can't give what we haven't yet cultivated. If you haven't yet found peace within yourself, the relationship will only echo that inner chaos. But once you've done the work, once both souls have faced their shadows and remembered their light, that's when the return becomes not just possible, but transformative. So if you're hoping for reunion with someone who touched your soul, if you still feel that quiet certainty that they are part of your path, ask yourself, has the love evolved? Have you evolved? Because the soul doesn't crave what's easy. It seeks what heals. And sometimes that healing can only happen after time. Distance and silence have done their part. The return isn't a promise, it's an invitation to rise from the ashes of your old self and meet the other again, not to repeat the past, but to create something completely new, together. Something that reflects not who you once were, but who you've now become. Living the myth with lucidity, embodiment and growth. There's a subtle danger hidden within the beauty of a soul connection. It's the temptation to live in the idea of the bond instead of the reality of it. Archetypes, myths, and spiritual teachings can guide us, but if we start confusing the story with the person, we lose the very essence of what makes a destined love transformational. because at some point, every myth must be lived. Not as a fantasy, but as a fully human experience, grounded in imperfection, growth, and truth. Carl Jung warned that identifying too closely with archetypes can lead to inflation, a psychological condition where we unconsciously believe ourselves to be playing out something grander than life. In the case of love, this might look like mistaking emotional highs for spiritual signs, or believing that every challenge is a divine test rather than an opportunity for growth. This is why postmodern thinkers have been cautious of grand narratives. They remind us that even the most sacred-seeming connection still involves two very human beings, each with their own wounds, needs, and flaws. And yet this doesn't mean the myth is false. It means the myth must be lived with lucidity, with presence, with the awareness that while a relationship may reflect something eternal, it still unfolds through everyday choices, how we communicate, how we hold space for the other, how we show up even when it's uncomfortable. This is where the sacred becomes real. A powerful spiritual resource that speaks to this kind of watchfulness is the Philokalia, a lesser-known but revered text in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. In it, the practice of nepsis, or inner vigilance, is emphasized. It teaches that discernment is the heart of spiritual life, that we must continuously return to the center of ourselves, watching our intentions, our reactions, and our assumptions, especially in matters of the heart. In soul connections, this kind of presence is crucial, because the stronger the bond, the easier it is to project, to idealize, to lose the clarity of the moment. Joseph Murphy, a leader in the New Thought movement, also spoke about the immense power of the subconscious mind in shaping reality. According to him, the beliefs we carry deep within us determine not just how we experience love, but how we attract and maintain it. If your subconscious is filled with abandonment, unworthiness, or fear, even a divinely orchestrated relationship will begin to mirror that. But if you fill your inner world with self-love, peace, and readiness, the relationship becomes a vehicle for spiritual growth rather than pain. So as you move through your own soul connection, ask yourself, not just, is this person my destiny, but am I showing up with presence, clarity, and inner wholeness? The myth is alive in you, yes, but it's up to you to live it with both reverence and reality, to honor the sacredness of the bond without escaping into illusion, because the real magic doesn't lie in finding someone who completes your story. It lies in becoming someone who can live the story fully, with open eyes, a grounded heart, and a soul ready to grow. Connecting the dots. So what does it all mean, really? When we talk about soul connections, destined love, or the powerful pull that draws us to someone across time, distance, or circumstance, we're not just talking about romance. We're talking about the deep undercurrents of human experience, about metaphysics, transformation, healing, and becoming. Carl Jung saw these connections not as fairy tales, but as psychological awakenings, as calls to individuation, the sacred path where we become whole through our relationships, not in spite of them. From ancient philosophies to mystical traditions, there's one thread that runs through all wisdom: the recognition that love, true, transformative, spiritual love, isn't here to make us feel safe. It's here to make us real, to strip away illusion, to bring our unconscious patterns to the surface so they can finally be seen, held, and healed. This is why soulmates often challenge us more than anyone else, not because they are meant to hurt us, but because they touch the rawest places inside us. They awaken the self, not just the heart. Simone de Beauvoir once said that a truly authentic relationship requires two whole individuals, each rooted in freedom and responsibility. Love, she believed, should never be about possession or dependence, but about choosing each other, freely, consciously, again and again. That idea aligns perfectly with the Jungian insight that individuation is the foundation of meaningful union, because you can't truly love another soul until you've begun to love and accept your own. Maybe this is what destined love really is. Not a perfect match made in heaven, but a sacred bond that pushes you to become more fully human. A person who can hold both beauty and brokenness in yourself and in someone else. A person who doesn't just chase the feeling of love, but who cultivates the conditions for love to grow, like trust, honesty, patience, and presence. And that kind of love doesn't just change you, it changes the world around you. Sociology and virtue ethics remind us that when individuals begin to relate with compassion, authenticity, and self-awareness, it doesn't just uplift their relationships, it elevates communities. It ripples outward into a more conscious, connected, and humane society. So maybe the better question isn't, will we reunite, but who will I be when we do? Because if two souls are meant to find their way back to each other, they will. But that path is rarely straight. It bends through self-discovery, shadow work, forgiveness, and growth. It asks for your humility, your courage, and above all, your patience. If you're on that journey, whether in union or in separation, remember this: soul connections don't come to rescue you. They come to remind you of who you are, of what you carry, of what you're capable of becoming. So like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more insights into the inner landscapes that shape our lives. And as you move forward, hold on to this quiet truth. What is true always finds a way, but that way will always ask something of you in return. Let it make you wiser, kinder, and more whole than you ever imagined.